The station called Veridum Prime hung in the darkness between stars like a frozen city. It was old, older than most species in the galaxy could remember. Its metal halls had seen 1,000 treaties signed and 1,000 wars prevented. Here, the Galactic Concord met to decide which species deserved to walk among the stars as equals and which ones would be forgotten. Commander Elena Vasquez stood at the entrance of the Great Hall and looked up at the ceiling that stretched so high it disappeared into shadow. She was not a tall woman. She was not particularly strong. Her hands were rough with scars from years of cutting through broken ship hulls. Her gray eyes were calm in a way that made some people uncomfortable. She had learned that calmness during the 11 months she spent alone in a dying ship, drifting through empty space with nothing but her own thoughts for company. Now she was here as Earth's last hope. The Great Hall was filled with beings from across the galaxy. Elena saw the Corvins first. They were massive creatures with wet gray skin and too many teeth. They watched her with amusement, the way a cat watches a mouse that has wandered into its territory. Behind them stood the Draxians, tall and thin with 4 arms each. They were kinder to humans, but even they looked at her with doubt in their eyes. And at the center of it all, raised on a platform of white stone, sat the Velthari. Elena had read about them, but reading was not the same as seeing. The Velthari were made of crystal. Their bodies caught the light and broke it into rainbows. They were beautiful in the way that a glacier is beautiful, cold, ancient, unforgiving. Their High Arbiter was named Sereth Ka, and when he spoke, his voice rang through the hall like someone striking a bell. "The human delegation has come again," Sereth Ka said. "This is the 7th year they have asked to join the Concord. 6 times we have refused. Their species is too young, too fragile, too brief." Elena felt the eyes of every being in the room turn toward her. She kept her face still. She had learned long ago that showing emotion to those who wanted to hurt you only gave them more weapons to use. "However," Serethka continued, "the Concord believes in fairness. We will offer the humans one final path to membership, the trial of Axiom." A sound moved through the crowd. It was not quite a gasp and not quite a laugh. It was something in between. Elena did not know what the trial of Axiom was, but she understood from that sound that it was not good. Ambassador Torek Vin, the Draxian who had supported humanity's petition for years, stepped forward. His 4 hands were clenched tight. "High Arbiter, the trial of Axiom has a survival rate of 12% among species that have trained for centuries. Humans have never even attempted it. This is not an opportunity. This is an execution." "It is the law," Sereth Ka replied. His crystal face showed nothing. "The human may refuse, but if she refuses, the petition dies. Permanently." Elena understood then. This was not about fairness. This was about making humanity give up. The Velthari expected her to look at the impossible odds and walk away. They expected her to be reasonable. She stepped forward. The hall went silent. "I accept," Elena said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried. That was another thing she had learned in those 11 months alone. You did not need to shout to be heard. You just needed to mean what you said. Sireth K's crystal form flickered. For just a moment, Elena thought she saw something like surprise in those ancient eyes, but it passed quickly. "The human accepts," he announced. "The trial will begin at the next cycle. Let it be recorded." The Corvin diplomat laughed. It was a wet, ugly sound that echoed off the metal walls. "Brave little mammal," he said. "We shall remember your species fondly, for a few years at least." Others laughed too. The sound filled the great hall and pressed against Elena from all sides. She stood in the middle of it and did not move. She had heard worse. She had heard the silence of space, the silence that went on forever. The silence that whispered that she was nothing and no one would come to save her. Laughter was nothing compared to that silence. When the crowd finally quieted, Elena turned to leave. Ambassador Torek Vin caught her arm with one of his 4 hands. His grip was gentle but urgent. "Commander Vasquez," he said quietly, "do you understand what you have done? The trial of Axiom is not a test of strength or intelligence. It is a test of the mind itself. The chamber reads your deepest fears, your worst memories, and uses them against you. Beings far older and wiser than any human have gone into that chamber and never come out. Elena looked at him. Her gray eyes were steady. I spent 11 months alone in a broken ship, she said. My oxygen recycler failed twice. I ate emergency rations that tasted like cardboard in despair. I talked to myself just to remember what my own voice sounded like. And every single day I woke up and decided to keep living, even though I had no good reason to believe anyone would ever find me. She gently removed his hand from her arm. I have already met my worst memories, Ambassador. We are old friends. She walked out of the great hall. Behind her, the aliens whispered and laughed and made bets on how quickly she would die. She did not look back. In her small quarters on the human ship docked at the station, Elena sat alone in the darkness. She did not turn on the lights. She had grown comfortable with darkness during those 11 months. It felt honest. The darkness did not pretend to be anything other than what it was. She thought about Earth. She thought about the 7 billion people who were counting on her without even knowing her name. She thought about her mother, who had died on Mars 20 years ago, waiting for a rescue that came too late. Elena had been 17 years old. She had been a junior pilot, too inexperienced to fly the rescue ship herself. She had begged them to let her go anyway. They had refused. By the time the real rescue team arrived, her mother had been dead for 6 hours. She had carried that weight ever since. It had shaped her. It had made her into the kind of person who spent 11 months refusing to die in a broken ship because giving up felt too much like abandoning her mother all over again. The Velthari thought they could break her with her own memories. They did not understand. Her memories had already broken her years ago. And she had put herself back together with nothing but stubbornness and grief. She had made herself into something that could bend without snapping, that could hurt without stopping. Elena smiled in the darkness. Tomorrow she would show them what humans were made of. The next morning, 2 Velthari guards came to Elena's quarters. They did not speak. They simply stood at her door and waited for her to follow. Their crystal bodies hummed with a low sound that Elena felt in her bones more than heard with her ears. She followed them through the winding corridors of Veridum Prime. The station was even larger than she had realized. They walked for nearly an hour, passing through sections where the architecture changed from smooth metal to rough stone to something that looked like frozen light. Each section had been built by a different species, she realized. Layers of history, one on top of another, like rings in a tree. Finally, they reached a door that was different from all the others. It was pure white, without any markings or handles. It seemed to glow from within. The Axiom Chamber, one of the guards said. His voice sounded like wind chimes. You will enter tomorrow at the first light cycle. You are permitted to view it now, so you understand what awaits. The door opened on its own. Beyond it was nothing. Not darkness, not light, just nothing. A white void that stretched in every direction without end. Elena stared into it and felt something she had not felt in a long time. Fear, real fear, the kind that made her hands want to shake and her heart want to run. She did not let it show. What happens inside? She asked. The guard studied her with eyes that were chips of blue crystal. The chamber reads the mind of whoever enters. It finds the things they fear most, the memories they have tried to forget, the questions they cannot answer. Then it builds a world from those things. The person must find their way through that world. Most do not. And if I fail, your mind will break. Your body will follow. The chamber will keep what remains. Elena nodded slowly. She had expected something like this. A test of the body she could have handled. A test of knowledge she could have prepared for. But a test of the mind, of the soul, of the things she kept locked in the deepest parts of herself. That was something else entirely. How long does the trial last? She asked. Time does not exist inside the chamber the way it exists outside. Some have spent what felt like years inside, only to emerge minutes later. Others have spent seconds that stretched into eternities. You will be inside until you succeed or until you cease to be. The door closed. The white void disappeared. Elena was left staring at an ordinary wall. That night, Ambassador Torek Vin came to her quarters again. This time, he brought information that changed everything. The trial is rigged, he said without greeting. His 4 hands moved nervously as he spoke. I have suspected for years, but now I have proof. Sirith Ka has been manipulating the chamber's parameters. Species that the Velthari want to keep out of the Concord are given harder trials. Impossible trials. Elena listened in silence. There is more, Torekvin continued. 6 cycles ago, a Velthari acolyte named Kael entered the chamber. He was young, brilliant, and he had been asking too many questions about the trial's fairness. The official record says he died, failed the trial like so many others. But I have spoken to those who were there. They say he did not die. They say he simply never came out. The chamber kept him. Why are you telling me this? Elena asked. Torekvin's alien face was difficult to read, but Elena thought she saw something like shame in his eyes. Because I have watched your species petition for membership for 6 years. I have watched you face rejection after rejection with dignity and patience. I have watched you refuse to give up even when everyone told you that you did not belong among the stars. He paused. I think you deserve to know what you are walking into. And I think, perhaps, you deserve a chance to walk away. Elena was quiet for a long time. She thought about Kael, the Velthari acolyte who had asked too many questions. She thought about all the others who had entered that white void and never returned. She thought about the trial that had been designed not to test her, but to destroy her. The ones who passed, she said finally, the ones who made it through. What happened to them? Torekvin seemed surprised by the question. They survived. They were granted membership for their species. But what happened to them, as people? The ambassador considered this. They came out different, quieter. The Corvins say that survivors of the trial have seen the face of truth itself. They say it changes you, makes everything else seem smaller, less important. Elena nodded slowly. She understood that feeling. She had experienced something similar during her 11 months alone. When you faced the void long enough, when you stared into the empty darkness and accepted that you might die there, forgotten and alone, something inside you shifted. The small fears fell away. The petty worries disappeared. You were left with only the essential things, the things that actually mattered. I am not going to walk away, she said. Torekvin sighed. I thought you might say that. You humans are strange creatures. You know you are mortal. You know your lives are brief. And yet you throw yourselves at impossible challenges as if you have nothing to lose. Elena smiled slightly. We have everything to lose. That is exactly why we cannot stop trying. The ambassador left shortly after. Elena sat alone in her quarters and thought about what he had told her. The trial was rigged. The chamber had been turned into a weapon, and somewhere inside that white void, a young Velthari was trapped, perhaps alive, perhaps something worse than dead. She could not save him. She knew that. Her job was to survive, to win membership for humanity, to prove that her species deserved to stand among the stars. That was enough of a burden without adding more. But the thought of Kaelur stayed with her, a young man who had asked too many questions, a young man who had been silenced for seeking truth. Elena understood that kind of person. She had been that kind of person once, before the years had worn down her sharp edges, before the loneliness had taught her patience, before she had learned that sometimes the best way to fight was simply to endure. She did not sleep that night. Instead, she sat in the darkness and prepared herself for what was coming. She went through her memories one by one, the good and the bad, the proud moments and the shameful ones. She looked at them clearly without flinching. If the chamber was going to use her past against her, she wanted to know exactly what weapons it had. The memories hurt. They always did. Her mother's face. The distress calls she had arrived too late to answer. The bodies she had found floating in the wreckage of ships she could not save. 11 months of talking to herself, of scratching marks on the wall to track the days, of wondering if anyone in the universe even remembered she existed, but she did not look away. She let the pain wash through her and out again. She had learned that pain was like water. If you tried to hold it back, it would build and build until it broke through and drowned you. But if you let it flow, it would pass. It always passed. When the first light cycle came, Elena was ready. She walked to the axiom chamber alone. No guards escorted her this time. No ambassadors wished her luck. She was completely alone, just as she had been on that broken ship so many years ago. The white door stood before her, glowing softly. Elena took one deep breath, then she stepped through. The void swallowed her whole. Elena opened her eyes and found herself standing in a place she knew too well. It was the salvage ship Meridian's Hope, the ship where she had spent 11 months alone, drifting through the Kepler void, waiting for a rescue that she had stopped believing would ever come. The metal walls were the same faded gray she remembered. The air recycler hummed with the same broken rhythm. The smell of recycled air and old sweat filled her nose. But something was wrong. The corridors were too long. When she walked forward, the walls seemed to stretch away from her, turning a simple hallway into an endless tunnel. The lights flickered in patterns she did not remember. And somewhere in the distance, she heard footsteps that were not her own. Elena understood what was happening. The chamber was building a world from her memories, twisting them into something new, something designed to break her. She had prepared for this. She had expected it. But expecting something and experiencing it were two very different things. The first figure appeared at the end of the corridor. It was a woman in a torn spacesuit. Her helmet was cracked. Her face was blue from lack of oxygen. Elena recognized her. Maria Santos, a cargo pilot whose distress signal Elena had answered 3 years ago. Elena had reached the ship in time to find the cargo, the flight recorder, and Maria's body floating in the airlock. Maria opened her dead eyes and looked at Elena. "You were too late," she said. Her voice was Elena's mother's voice. "You are always too late." Elena's heart pounded. She forced herself to breathe. "You are not real," she said. "You are just a memory." "Does that make it hurt less?" Maria asked. She smiled with blue lips. "Does that bring me back to life?" More figures appeared. They stepped out of the walls, rose from the floor, fell from the ceiling. Dozens of them. All the people Elena had failed to save over her years in space. All the distress calls she had answered too late. All the wrecks she had found with no survivors. All the names she had recorded in her ship's log before moving on to the next mission. They all spoke with her mother's voice. "You let us die. You were not good enough. You will never be good enough." Elena walked through them. She had no choice. The corridor only went one direction, and standing still would not save her. Their hands reached for her as she passed. Their fingers were cold, so cold, like the void of space itself was touching her skin. She kept walking. The corridor opened into a room she did not recognize. It was some kind of control center, filled with screens and buttons and levers. At the center of the room sat a single chair. In the chair sat her mother. Elena stopped. Her mother looked exactly as she remembered. Warm brown eyes, gray hair pulled back in a practical knot. The small scar on her chin from a childhood accident she had never explained. She was wearing the same clothes she had worn the last time Elena saw her. The day she left for Mars. The day Elena did not know would be the last day. "Sit down, Elena," her mother said. "We need to talk." "You are not my mother." Elena's voice was steady, but only because she was using every bit of strength she had to keep it that way. "My mother died 20 years ago." "Yes, I did. And whose fault was that?" The question hit Elena like a physical blow. She knew it was manipulation. She knew the chamber was using her deepest guilt against her, but knowing did not make it hurt less. "I was 17, Elena said. "I was not qualified to fly the rescue ship. They would not let me go. You did not try hard enough. You gave up. You let them tell you no, and I died waiting for a daughter who never came." Her mother stood up from the chair. She walked toward Elena slowly, each step deliberate. "You have spent your whole life trying to make up for that moment. All those rescue missions, all those distress calls. You thought if you saved enough strangers, you could forgive yourself for not saving me." Elena's eyes burned. She refused to blink. She refused to cry. "But it does not work that way," her mother continued. "You cannot balance the scales. You cannot undo what you did. You will carry me with you until you die, and it will never be enough." The room began to change. The walls collapsed inward. The ceiling pressed down. Elena found herself in a smaller space, then a smaller one, until she was trapped in a metal box barely large enough to hold her body. The air grew thin. The darkness closed in. And then she was given a choice. Screens appeared in front of her, showing faces she did not recognize but somehow knew. The chamber was presenting her with a scenario, a ship in danger, not enough escape pods for everyone. She had to choose who lived and who died. Elena studied the faces. A young man who reminded her of her little brother. An old woman who had kind eyes. A child who could not have been more than 6 years old. The chamber wanted her to pick. The chamber wanted her to play God, to decide whose life had more value, to prove that she was the same kind of monster who had let her mother die. She tried to find a solution. A way to save everyone, but the scenario was designed perfectly. Every option led to death. Every choice was wrong. The pressure built inside her chest, the weight of all those lives, all those impossible decisions, crushed down on her. She fell to her knees. She could not breathe. She could not think. The chamber was winning. She could feel her mind starting to crack, starting to break apart under the strain. And then, in that moment of absolute darkness, Elena began to laugh. It was not a mad laugh. It was not a broken laugh. It was a small, sad, gentle sound that rose from somewhere deep inside her chest. It surprised her as much as it surprised the chamber. "You do not understand," she said. She was speaking to the void itself, to the intelligence that had built this nightmare around her. "You do not understand humans at all." The chamber did not respond, but Elena felt it listening. She pushed herself back to her feet. Her legs shook but held. Her heart still pounded but did not stop. She looked at the screens, at the faces of people she could not save, and she let herself feel the grief of it. The impossible, horrible grief of being forced to choose. Then she made her choice. She chose no one. The screens flickered. The chamber had not expected this response. "I will not play your game," Elena said. "I will not pretend that I have the right to decide who lives and who dies. I am not a god. I am not a judge. I am just a woman who has been trying her whole life to save people, knowing that I will fail more often than I succeed." She turned away from the screens. "You want me to break because I cannot save everyone. But I already know I cannot save everyone. I have known that since I was 17 years old, watching my mother's rescue ship take off without me." Her voice grew stronger. "The difference between me and you is that I keep trying anyway." The metal box around her began to crack. Light poured through the fractures. "That is what you do not understand about humans," Elena said. "We are not strong because we win. We are strong because we lose and we get back up. We are strong because we know we are going to die and we choose to live anyway. We are strong because we carry our dead with us, every single one, and we refuse to let their memory disappear." The box shattered. Elena stood in the white void again, but now she was no longer alone. She could feel the chamber's presence around her, vast and ancient and confused. It had broken thousands of minds with this trial. It had never encountered one that bent instead of breaking. But Elena was not finished yet, because in the cracks of the collapsing scenario, she had seen something, a flicker, a spark of consciousness that was not her own. Someone else was in here with her, and she was not going to leave them behind. The white void stretched in every direction. There was no up, no down, no sense of distance or direction. Elena floated in the emptiness, but she did not feel lost. She had spent 11 months in a kind of void very much like this one, the endless darkness of space, broken only by distant stars that offered no comfort and no rescue. She had learned to find her center in that darkness. She had learned to carry her own light. The chamber pressed against her mind. She could feel it trying to find new weaknesses, new fears, new ways to break her. But she had shown it everything already. She had walked through her worst memories and come out the other side. There was nothing left for it to use. "You are still here," she said to the void. "I can feel you watching." For a long moment, nothing responded. Then the white void shifted, and Elena found herself standing on something solid. A floor made of light. The space around her changed, forming walls and a ceiling, until she was standing in a room that looked almost like the Great Hall of Veridum Prime. But this version was empty and silent, stripped of all decoration, all meaning. A figure stood at the far end of the room. It was not her mother this time. It was not one of the dead she had failed to save. It was something else entirely. A shape that kept changing, flowing from one form to another like water. One moment it looked like a Velthari, all crystal and cold light. The next moment it was something Elena had no name for, something vast and ancient and utterly alien. "You should have broken," the figure said. Its voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "Your species is young. Your minds are fragile. You were not built to withstand this trial." Elena walked toward it. Each step felt like pushing through deep water, but she kept moving. "You made a mistake," she said. "You designed this trial to break beings who are afraid of death, beings who have lived for thousands of years and never had to face their own ending. But humans are different. We know we are going to die from the moment we are born. We live our entire lives with that knowledge sitting on our shoulders." She stopped a few feet from the shifting figure. "You cannot scare us with mortality. We are already intimate with it." The figure flickered. For just a moment, Elena thought she saw something like uncertainty in its ever-changing form. "You think guilt is our weakness?" she continued. "You showed me everyone I failed to save. You showed me my mother. You thought that weight would crush me." She shook her head slowly. "But we carry our dead. All of us. Every human who has ever lived has carried the weight of those they have lost. We build monuments to remember them. We tell their stories around fires. We whisper their names into the darkness and dare the universe to forget them." Elena reached out her hand, not to attack, not to threaten, just to touch. "Your trial breaks beings who try to escape their grief, but humans do not escape it. We embrace it. We let it become part of us, and somehow, impossibly, we keep going." Her fingers touched the shifting figure. The moment she made contact, something changed. The chamber shuddered. The white void cracked like ice on a frozen lake. And through those cracks, Elena saw something she was not supposed to see. A boy. He was young, maybe 20 years old by human standards, though Elena knew that meant little for a Velthari. His crystal body was dim, almost dark, as if someone had drained all the light out of him. He floated in a space behind the space, a hidden layer of the chamber that should have been invisible. Kyle-Ur, the acolyte who had asked too many questions, the one they said had died 6 cycles ago. He was still alive. Barely. The chamber was using him, feeding on his consciousness to power its illusions, to make its scenarios more realistic, more painful. He was not dead. He was something worse than dead. He was trapped. The shifting figure tried to pull away from Elena, but she held on. She would not let go. "You kept him," she said. Her voice was quiet but hard as steel. "You did not just fail him. You used him. You turned him into a battery for your lies. He asked too many questions." The figure's voice was defensive now, almost panicked. "He threatened to expose the truth about the trial. We could not allow that. The Concord must believe the trial is fair. The Concord must believe—" "I do not care what the Concord believes." Elena pulled harder. The cracks in the void spread wider. She could see Kale-Ur more clearly now. His eyes were closed. His crystal form was covered in fractures like a vase that had been dropped and barely held together. "He is not Elena said. "He was never yours, and I am taking him back." The chamber screamed. There was no other word for it. A sound tore through the white void, a sound of rage and fear, and something that might have been pain. The shifting figure exploded into 1,000 fragments, each one trying to reform, trying to stop her. Elena ignored them all. She pushed through the broken layers of the chamber's reality. She pushed through illusions and memories and nightmares that the chamber threw at her in desperation. She saw her mother's face again. She saw Maria Santos and all the other dead. She saw herself as a child, crying in her room after learning that her mother was never coming home. She saw all of it, and she did not stop. Because somewhere ahead of her, there was a boy who had been brave enough to ask questions, and he had been punished for it. Somewhere ahead of her, there was someone who needed help, and Elena had spent her entire life answering that call. She reached Kale-Ur. He floated in a bubble of stolen consciousness, connected to the chamber by threads of light that pulsed with each of its illusions. Elena grabbed those threads with both hands and pulled. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. The chamber tried to use her against herself, tried to make her see things that were not real, tried to convince her that she was dying, that she had already died, that she had never existed at all. She pulled anyway. The threads snapped one by one. Kale Ur's crystal form flickered. His eyes opened, just for a moment, and he looked at Elena with confusion and something that might have been hope. "Hold on," she told him. "I have you. Just hold on." She wrapped her arms around him and pulled him close. He was cold, so cold like he had been frozen in ice for years, but she could feel the faintest spark of life still burning inside his crystal chest. The chamber collapsed around them. The white void tore itself apart. Reality bent and twisted in ways that human minds were not meant to see. Elena closed her eyes and thought of Earth. She thought of blue skies and green grass and the sound of rain on a metal roof. She thought of her mother's smile and the way her father's hands shook when he played guitar. She thought of all the small, beautiful, ordinary things that made life worth living, and she held on. When she opened her eyes again, she was lying on the floor of a room filled with alien faces. The white door of the Axiom chamber stood behind her, cracked and smoking. In her arms, still cold but slowly warming, was Kale Ur. She had done it. She had survived the trial, and she had not come out alone. The silence in the observation room lasted only a moment. Then it exploded into chaos. Elena lay on the cold floor, still holding Kale Ur's dimly glowing body in her arms. Medical drones rushed toward them, their mechanical limbs reaching out with sensors and treatment devices. Voices shouted in a dozen different languages. Some she recognized and many she did not. But one voice cut through all the others. "This is impossible." Sirith Ka's crystal form pushed through the crowd of observers. His body flickered with agitation, colors racing across his surface like lightning in a storm cloud. The human could not have survived. The parameters were set perfectly. She should have broken within the first cycle. Elena pushed herself up onto her knees. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest. Her head pounded with a pain that felt like someone had driven nails into her skull. But she forced herself to move anyway. She had work to do. "Get away from her," Sirith Ka commanded. His voice had lost its musical quality. Now it sounded sharp, desperate. She cheated somehow. She found a way to corrupt the trial. The results are invalid. Invalid? Ambassador Torek Vin stepped forward. His forearms were crossed, and his alien face showed something that looked very much like cold fury. "She walked into your chamber, and she walked out again. That is the trial. That is what you demanded of her. She brought something out with her. That is not permitted. That is Kale Ur." The new voice came from the back of the crowd. A young Velthari woman pushed her way forward, her crystal body shaking with emotion. She stopped when she saw the figure in Elena's arms, and a sound came out of her that needed no translation. It was grief and joy and disbelief all wrapped together. "My brother," she whispered. "You said he was dead. You told our family he failed the trial and his body could not be recovered. You said—" Her voice broke. "You lied." The observation room went very quiet. Elena finally managed to stand. Her legs felt like they were made of wet paper, but she locked her knees and refused to fall. She gently transferred Kale Ur to the medical drones that hovered nearby. They immediately began scanning him, their lights flickering rapidly as they assessed his condition. Then she turned to face Sirith Ka. The High Arbiter towered over her. His crystal form was nearly 3 times her height, and light bent around him in ways that hurt to look at directly. He was ancient and powerful, and he had ruled this station for longer than humanity had known how to write. Elena was not impressed. "You told me," she said slowly, "that humans cannot survive this trial." Her voice was quiet, but somehow it carried across the entire room. Every being present turned to listen. Sirith Ka's form flickered. "The trial was designed to test the limits of consciousness. Your species is too young, too fragile, too—" "Then who was the one who died?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Elena pointed at Kale Ur, who was now surrounded by medical drones working frantically to stabilize his fading life signs. "He did not die in the trial. He was trapped inside it, used. The chamber fed on his consciousness to make its illusion stronger." She turned back to Sirith Ka. "How many others?" How many beings entered your trial and were told they failed, when really they were just kept, consumed? The silence was absolute. Then another voice spoke up. A Corvan diplomat, the same one who had laughed at Elena in the Great Hall, stepped forward. His wet gray face showed no amusement now. 3 cycles ago, my nephew entered the trial. We were told he died. His body was never returned. His voice was a low growl. I want to know, is he in there too? More voices joined in. A Draxian who had lost a colleague. A being from a species Elena did not recognize who spoke of a missing friend. One by one, they stepped forward, each with their own story of someone who had entered the Axiom chamber and never returned. Sirith Ka's crystal form began to crack. Actual cracks, spreading across his surface like damage from an earthquake. Elena realized that the High Arbiter's physical form was connected to his emotional state. The exposure, the shame, the fear of what was about to happen. It was breaking him apart. You do not understand, he said. His voice was no longer commanding. It was pleading. The trial must appear effective. If species knew they could fail and survive, if they knew the truth, they would all attempt it. The Concord would be flooded with unworthy members. The balance of power would collapse. You were protecting yourself, Elena said. You were protecting your power. You were protecting a lie. She stepped closer to him, close enough that she had to crane her neck to look up at his fracturing face. And now the lie is over. The investigation that followed took weeks. The Axiom chamber was shut down and examined by experts from a dozen different species. They found 3 other consciousnesses trapped inside its architecture, all belonging to beings who had been declared dead after supposedly failing the trial. 2 of them could be saved. One had been trapped so long that nothing remained but echoes. Sirith Ka was removed from his position. The Velthari conclave, horrified that one of their own had been sacrificed and used in this way, distanced themselves from him entirely. He was last seen being escorted to a prison ship, his once magnificent crystal form now dull and cracked beyond repair. Kal-Ur survived. It took months of treatment, but slowly his light returned. The first words he spoke when he regained consciousness were to ask about the human who had pulled him out of the darkness. When he was finally able to walk again, he came to Elena's quarters personally to thank her. She had not expected that. She did not know what to say. You did not know me, he said. His voice was soft, still recovering from years of silence. You had every reason to leave me behind. Saving yourself would have been enough. Why did you help me? Elena thought about the question for a long time. She thought about her mother, waiting for a rescue that never came. She thought about 11 months alone in a broken ship, refusing to give up because giving up felt like betraying everyone who had ever believed in her. Humans have a saying, she finally said. No one gets left behind. She paused. We say it because we need it to be true. And sometimes if you need something badly enough, you can make it true. Kal-Ur considered this. Then he bowed, a deep and formal gesture that Elena understood was the highest form of respect among his people. Your species is remarkable, he said. I hope the Concord understands that now. They did. 3 days later, Ambassador Torek Vin formally moved that humanity be granted full membership in the Galactic Concord. The vote was not even close. Species that had laughed at humanity now voted in their favor. Species that had ignored them for decades now wanted to be their allies. Elena watched the vote from a balcony overlooking the Great Hall. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel proud. Mostly she felt tired in a way that sleep could not fix. A young Velthari woman joined her on the balcony, Kal-Ur's sister. They stood together in silence for a while, watching the stars through the station's transparent walls. What will you do now? The woman asked. Elena thought about it. She thought about Earth, spinning somewhere in the distance, filled with billions of people who would never know how close they had come to being left behind. She thought about all the work that remained, all the bridges that needed to be built, all the trust that needed to be earned. I will keep going, she said. That is what humans do. We lose and we grieve and we pick ourselves up and we keep going. She looked at the stars. They seemed closer now, more welcoming. And now, she added quietly, we will do it among friends. Somewhere out there, the universe continued to spin in its ancient, indifferent way. It did not care about humanity. It did not care about trials or politics or the dreams of small beings on small worlds. But humanity cared. And that, Elena thought, was enough. It had always been enough.